The corridors of the Pentagon carried their own kind of silence, a hum that wasn't quite silence at all, but the muted whisper of 1,000 unseen operations moving at once. Air conditioning vents breathed steadily. The muted chatter of distant offices echoed faintly. The occasional metallic clink of a coffee mug meeting a desk carried farther than it should have. The marble floors, polished to a mirror shine, reflected every sliver of light from the overhead panels, so that walking down them felt like treading through a corridor made of glass. Marcus Reed had learned the rhythm of these halls as intimately as a soldier learns the terrain of a battlefield. His mop bucket rolled smoothly on well-oiled wheels, barely making a sound, while his own footsteps were slow, steady, and deliberate. His uniform was a deep navy blue, spotless, with the gold-stitched words "Facilities Staff" embroidered neatly above his heart. The laminated ID badge clipped to his chest read simply Marcus R. and bore the faint scuffs of years of wear. He'd been a janitor here for almost 2 years, long enough to know the faces of the generals and analysts, the coffee habits of colonels, the favored elevator of the Secretary of Defense. Long enough to know which officers nodded politely and which looked through him as if he were part of the wall. Most days, Marcus preferred it that way. People rarely notice what blends into the background, and invisibility had its uses that Marcus understood better than anyone in this building would ever guess. Still, there were days when that invisibility stung. Days when a young officer, fresh from some Ivy League program, would breeze past him without a glance, barking orders into a phone as if Marcus were air. Days when he'd hear laughter through an open door at a joke that ended with the words, "But he's just the janitor." Marcus had been called a lot of things in his life. Janitor was the least insulting. But the sting came not from the word itself, but from the assumption buried inside it, that his intelligence, his skill, his value, began and ended with pushing a mop. That Tuesday morning had begun like any other. The early sun slanted through the east-facing windows, pooling pale gold light across the hallways. Marcus's cart was stocked, mop, broom, microfiber cloths folded with military precision, bottles of cleaner arranged like soldiers in formation. He always started on the east wing, working his way toward the more secure sections before the real rush began. He was halfway down the corridor that led past the operations center when he noticed the doors were ajar. That alone was unusual. The ops center was usually sealed tight, accessible only to those with the right clearance. Marcus knew better than to linger, but then the sound of raised voices drifted out. "We've got 65 minutes before that convoy moves," a clipped, urgent voice was saying. "After that, we lose them for good. No drones, no airstrike, nothing." Marcus's eyes flicked toward the door. Inside, a dozen senior officers were clustered around a massive oval table. Wall-mounted screens displayed live satellite imagery of a desert region, jagged canyons carved deep into reddish earth, shadows stretching like claws across the terrain. The camera panned slowly, zooming in on a fortified compound wedged between two cliff faces. A young major, clean-shaven and tense, stabbed a finger at the image. "There. That's the target. But we can't get to it in time. There's only one viable angle for a shot, and it's too far. Wind drift is insane, thermal currents are unpredictable, and with those canyon walls, it's suicide for any of our snipers." An older colonel, tall, broad-shouldered, silver hair cropped short, crossed his arms. "We've got the best marksmen in the country, Major. If they can't do it, it's not doable." "It's not about skill," the major argued. "It's physics. The distance is past the effective range for a clean kill, and the crosswinds," he trailed off, shaking his head. "We'd need a miracle." From the hallway, Marcus studied the screen for only a few seconds before recognition hit him. He knew this terrain, not from photos, but from memory. His mind automatically calculated angles, distances, wind behavior, even the timing of shadow movements across rock. It was an instinct burned into him from years of work he no longer spoke about. He started to roll his cart past, intending to finish his shift, but then another officer muttered something that stopped him in his tracks. "It's impossible," the man said. "We should just scrub the mission." Marcus's voice came before he had time to think. "It's not impossible." The room went silent. Heads turned toward the doorway. Colonel Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Marcus stepped into the room slowly, the mop handle still in his hand. "I said it's not impossible. You're overcompensating for the wind drift because you're assuming the thermals are uniform across the canyon. They're not. The north wall heats faster, creates microbursts that actually stabilize for about 7 seconds every 3 minutes. That's your window." The major stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. "And you'd know that, how, exactly?" "You're the janitor." A ripple of chuckles moved through the room. Marcus ignored them. Whitmore studied him. "You seem to know a lot about wind patterns, Mr. Reed." Marcus's gaze held steady. 15 years, 75th Ranger Regiment. Long-range reconnaissance and special operations. I've taken shots past 2 kilometers in conditions worse than this. Your problem isn't the physics. It's that your shooters aren't thinking in terms of thermal rhythm. The chuckles died instantly. One of the analysts blinked. "Wait, Marcus Reed? Operation Iron Spear?" Marcus shrugged. "That was a long time ago." Whitmore's expression shifted slightly. "You're saying you could make that shot?" "I'm saying," Marcus replied evenly, "that if you give me the right rifle, the right ammo, and a ride to the ridgeline, I'll make it. First try." The major snorted. "This is the most precise long-range strike in a decade, and we're supposed to hand it to the janitor?" Marcus didn't even look at him. "I don't need you to believe I can do it. I need you to get me in position before your target moves." Whitmore stared at him for a long moment, then turned to the others. "We're out of options. If he's who I think he is, we'd be fools not to try." In less than 10 minutes, Marcus was in the gear room. The feel of tactical equipment in his hands was like shaking hands with an old friend. He checked the rifle's weight, cycled the bolt, adjusted the scope, tested the suppressor. Everything he did was methodical, precise, unhurried. As the Black Hawk lifted into the air, the crew eyed him curiously. To them, he was just a middle-aged black man in a janitor's uniform now wearing borrowed tactical gear. But Marcus didn't notice their skepticism. His mind was already breaking the problem into calculations: wind speed, elevation, bullet drop, Coriolis effect. 28 minutes later, lying prone on a rocky ridge with the target 2,150 meters away, Marcus slowed his breathing. The wind kissed the back of his neck, carrying the faint scent of sun-heated stone. He felt the shift in the thermal current, 7 seconds of stability. That was the rhythm he'd been waiting for. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report was muffled by the suppressor, but in his scope, the target dropped instantly. Back in the operations center, the room erupted in stunned silence. Colonel Whitmore's voice was quiet but carried to every corner: "Gentlemen, never underestimate the man you overlook." Marcus packed his rifle with the same calm precision as before. By the time the Black Hawk carried him back, he was already thinking about the mop bucket waiting for him in the hallway.